The picture of this Eagles offseason becomes clearer the more you really sit with the roster, the contracts, and the unanswered questions inside the building. This is not just a normal reset. This is Philadelphia standing at a crossroads where almost every major decision connects to another one. Free agency, the offensive coordinator hire, the offensive line, the future of A.J. Brown, and even the structure of the defense are all tied together. And when you go through the roster strictly based on what's actually there, you start to understand how complicated this next stretch really is. It starts with the players who are about to hit the open market. On offense, the Eagles have real movement coming. Fred Johnson filled in for Lane Johnson this year and now becomes a free agent. Brett Toth, who can play both guard and center, is also up. Matt Pryor, who played better at guard than tackle, is likely playing elsewhere in 2026. Sam Howell, brought in to be QB3, is another name tied to that room. Jay Dillon didn't make much impact after Tank Bigsby solidified himself as part of the future, so his role feels finished. But the biggest issue comes at tight end, because right now, the Eagles essentially have nobody locked in long-term. Dallas Goedert just had a career year with 11 touchdowns, the most by a tight end in franchise history, and yet he's still part of a group that includes Grant Calcaterra and Kylen Granson hitting free agency. That means the Eagles walk into the offseason with a massive question at a position that has always been important in this offense. At wide receiver, Jahan Dotson looks like a player who might be wearing another uniform in 2026. That opens a bigger conversation about whether the Eagles are set at WR3 or whether things could get much louder if something happens with A.J. Brown. And that leads directly into the biggest offensive question of the entire offseason. Who is calling the plays? The Eagles aren't even in a position to talk draft strategy yet, because everything depends on the offensive coordinator. What scheme will they run? How will they use Jalen Hurts? Can they maximize DeVonta Smith and A.J. Brown with better spacing and creative route concepts? Can they revive the ground game in a way that actually matches the talent on the roster? And that ground game problem wasn't Saquon Barkley being washed. He still looked fast, physical, explosive, and dynamic. The issue was the offensive line. Barkley's yards before contact were down almost a full yard to a yard and a half all season. That doesn't happen because a running back forgot how to run. It happens because the interior of the line was getting beat. Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, and Cam Jurgens are all highly paid, and all three had rough seasons. Tyler Steen was fine, but not dominant. Lane Johnson is still Lane Johnson, but now even his future is something people inside the league wonder about. Does he want to keep playing? Does he come back? And if you're an incoming offensive coordinator, you're asking those same questions. Am I getting A.J. Brown? Am I getting Lane Johnson? Am I walking into a full rebuild up front? Because rebuilding the line might actually be necessary. The Eagles drafted Jihad Campbell and Andrew Makuba, and those look like good long-term pieces, but they also spent picks on Miles Hinton, Cameron Williams, and Drew Kendall. Those are developmental linemen, not finished products. Jeff Stoutland has work to do not just with young players, but with veterans who need to play better fast. At quarterback, Philadelphia technically has two, Jalen Hurts at QB1 and Tanner McKee as QB2. But what makes this interesting is the context of the 2026 quarterback draft class, which is thin. That creates a market. Teams like Miami, Pittsburgh, Minnesota, Arizona, and the Jets are always looking. So if someone calls about Tanner McKee with a second or third round pick, suddenly the Eagles have a decision to make. And if that happens, then backup quarterback becomes another box Howie Roseman has to check. Running back is one of the few rooms that actually feels stable. Barkley, Bigsby, and Will Shipley give you flexibility. Bigsby didn't get enough touches. Shipley flashed on third downs and special teams. The backs weren't the problem. The blocking was. At receiver, the names stay the same for now. A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, Britton Covey, Johnny Wilson. And Johnny Wilson's absence quietly hurt the Eagles because of his blocking. Instead, they leaned more on Grant Calcaterra, who can't block like that. It changes how you call plays. And then the elephant in the room stays there. Will A.J. Brown be on the team next season? Around the league, scouts and executives think a trade is possible. Brandon Graham believes A.J. is coming back.
Inside that tension sits one of the most important storylines of the entire offseason. Tight end is just as unstable. Goddard just set records and still might not be guaranteed back. The Eagles like athletic pass catchers there, but draft position matters, contracts matter, and how the next coordinator uses the position matters. Cam Latu is used more like a fullback. Carson Steele is on the 90-man. Those aren't answers yet. They're placeholders. Defensively, things are calmer, but not quiet. Vic Fangio gives the Eagles structure. Brandon Graham believes he can still play. Jalen Phillips is one of the most sought-after free agents and could get paid big. Azeez Ojulari didn't work out. Josh Uche became a non-factor once the room got crowded. That leaves Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt as the only edge players you really feel locked in about. And that's not enough in today's NFL. Howie Roseman has work to do at pass rusher. Inside, the defensive tackles are loaded. Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, and Ty Robinson give the Eagles one of the deepest interior rooms in football. Jordan Davis just had a career year and feels like a player the Eagles should extend, not just for production but for locker room presence. Linebacker is another pivot point. Zach Bond was still good, even if he wasn't at his All-Pro finalist level. Jihad Campbell made the Pro Football Writers of America All-Rookie team and looks like a core piece. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. flashes. That's why bringing back Nakobe Dean feels unlikely. He's expensive and injured too often, and the Eagles already have young answers behind him. At corner, the foundation is strong. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean were first-team All-Pros. That gives the Eagles something special. But opposite Quinyon, and at safety, things get thin. Andrew Mukuba is coming back from a broken ankle. Sidney Brown is more special teams than starter. The Eagles may need help there if they want the secondary to stay elite after losing Christian Parker to Dallas. Even kicker becomes a discussion. Jake Elliott went 24-27, the lowest percentage of his career. He's still under contract and expensive to move. So the Eagles might ride one more year even if fans are frustrated. When you zoom out, the needs stack up fast. Offensive coordinator first, then offensive tackle and interior line, pass rusher, corner, safety, wide receiver, tight end, and maybe even kicker. The good news is draft capital. The Eagles have multiple top 100 picks and flexibility to trade up or sit tight. Howie Roseman likes to move, and with this many moving parts, movement feels inevitable. This isn't a soft offseason. This is a structural one. The Eagles aren't just patching holes. They're deciding what version of themselves they want to be moving forward. Do they double down on the core? Do they reshuffle around Jalen Hurts? Do they protect A.J. Brown or flip him for assets? Do they rebuild the line or trust it one more time? Every choice connects to the next one, and that's why this offseason feels heavier than normal, because the Eagles aren't just replacing players, they're redefining the direction of the team. So when you look at everything sitting in front of Philadelphia right now, what do you think is the single most important decision the Eagles have to get right before anything else even matters? Because once you start pulling on one thread, everything else moves with it. If the Eagles get the offensive coordinator hire wrong, it won't matter how many draft picks Howie Roseman has. Scheme dictates personnel. Identity dictates spending. And right now, the Eagles don't have a clear offensive identity. They have talent, but not cohesion. Whoever walks into that building as the new play caller is going to look at Jalen Hurts first and ask a simple question. What version of him are we building around? This past season, the offense felt disjointed, not because the roster lacked stars, but because nothing flowed naturally. Hurts wasn't consistently put in positions to attack defenses with rhythm. DeVonta Smith and A.J. Brown are elite route runners, but too often they were isolated instead of layered into concepts that create space. The run game had flashes, but not structure. And when structure disappears, you start asking players to win one-on-one every snap. That's not sustainable over a full season. That's why the coordinator decision sits on top of everything else. If the Eagles hire someone who leans into timing, spacing, and multiplicity, suddenly the value of the offensive line changes. Suddenly the tight end position becomes more important again. Suddenly Barkley's explosiveness has a lane instead of a wall. But if they go conservative, predictable, and heavy, then the roster construction shifts in another direction entirely. And that's where the A.J. Brown conversation becomes unavoidable. Around the league, executives and scouts believe he could be moved. Not because he isn't great, but because he's valuable. He's the kind of player that can bring premium draft capital back. If the Eagles believe they're reshaping the offense instead of just retooling it, then A.J. becomes leverage. But leverage is dangerous, because when you trade a true number one receiver, you're not just replacing production, you're replacing gravity. Defenses tilt toward A.J. Brown. Without him, everyone else sees tighter coverage. That changes how Hurts plays, how Smith gets used, and how coordinators design their game plans. Brandon Graham believes A.J. is coming back. That matters inside the locker room. But belief and business are two different languages in the NFL. Howie Roseman listens to both, and the longer this offseason goes without clarity, the louder that question becomes. Are the Eagles protecting the core, or cashing it in to reload? Up front, the offensive line decision might be even more important than receiver. The Eagles built their identity for years around dominance in the trenches. This season, that dominance slipped. Jordan Mailata looked tired. Landon Dickerson and Cam Jurgens were hurt and inconsistent. Tyler Steen competed, but didn't control. Lane Johnson is still great, but age and mileage are real. The Eagles can't pretend this group is untouchable anymore. If they do, Barkley's yards before contact will stay low, and Hurts will keep feeling pressure faster than any quarterback wants. Jeff Stoutland has young pieces to work with. Miles Hinton, Cameron Williams, Drew Kendall. But development takes time, and contenders don't usually wait. That's why right guard and interior protection feel like positions the Eagles must address aggressively, either through free agency, trades, or early draft capital. The line can't just be respected again. It has to impose itself again. On the other side of the ball, the defense quietly has a much healthier foundation. Vic Fangio gives them structure, discipline, and clarity. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean already look like cornerstones, not just starters. That allows the Eagles to be selective instead of desperate. But pass rush still wins games in January, and right now, Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt alone aren't enough. Jalen Phillips is expensive. Brandon Graham is aging. Azeez Ojulari didn't hit. Josh Uche faded. That leaves a room full of question marks when the Eagles need answers. Inside, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis change games. That's the part of the defense that already feels championship level. Extending Jordan Davis feels like the kind of move that keeps culture intact while protecting production. And culture matters more than people admit. Teams that constantly turn over leaders eventually lose their voice. At linebacker, Jihad Campbell's development gives the Eagles flexibility. They're no longer forced to overpay at the position. Zach Bond still contributes. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. flashes. That's why moving on from Nakobe Dean becomes logical, not emotional. Availability matters. Cost matters. And the Eagles finally have depth there. In the secondary, Quinyon and Cooper mask a lot of sins, but safety is still unsettled. Andrew Mukuba has talent, but he's coming off injury. Sidney Brown isn't a true starter. If the Eagles want Fangio's system to reach its ceiling, they need players on the back end who process fast, tackle clean, and communicate well. That's usually not cheap. Even special teams isn't safe from scrutiny. Jake Elliott's percentage dipped. Fans notice, but contracts matter. Dead money matters. And sometimes the Eagles choose patience over emotion. One more year might be reality whether people like it or not. So when you stack everything together, you see the real picture. This offseason is not about one splash move. It's about alignment. The coordinator must match Hurts. The line must match Barkley. The receivers must match the scheme. The defense must match Fangio's vision. And Howie Roseman has to connect all of it without breaking the cap structure or the locker room. That's why this offseason feels like a recalibration, not a rebuild, and not a simple reload. The Eagles are deciding what kind of team they want to be when the games actually matter. Explosive and aggressive, or controlled and physical, vertical or balanced, veteran-heavy or youth-driven. Every move over the next few months will quietly answer that question. Now I want to hear from you. If you are sitting in Howie Roseman's chair right now, what's the first move you're making to shape the future of this team? Because even after you think you've mapped the direction, the Eagles still sit in a dangerous middle ground between urgency and patience. And that's where franchises either sharpen themselves into contenders or slowly drift without realizing it. Philadelphia doesn't have the luxury of drifting. Not with Jalen Hurts in his prime window, not with a roster that still has elite talent, and not with a fan base that understands what a championship-caliber team is supposed to look like. What makes this offseason fascinating is that the Eagles aren't broken. They're uneven, and uneven teams are harder to fix than bad ones. Bad teams know exactly what they are. Uneven teams convince themselves they're closer than they really are. The Eagles have stars at premium positions, but they also have weaknesses at those same positions that show up when the games get tight. That's why Howie Roseman's approach can't just be aggressive, it has to be precise. Start again with Jalen Hurts, because everything flows from him. The Eagles still believe he's their franchise quarterback, but belief only holds if the environment around him works. Hurts needs protection first, answers second, and confidence third. This season, he didn't always get any of the three consistently. When the interior line collapses early, the quarterback stops trusting timing routes. When timing routes disappear, receivers end up freelancing. When freelancing starts, the offense becomes predictable even when it has elite athletes on the field. That's how talent gets neutralized without anyone actually playing badly. That's why the offensive coordinator is not just a hire, it's a philosophy shift. Whoever comes in has to build the offense around rhythm, not reaction. Hurts is at his best when the first read is defined, the pocket is stable, and the play has answers built in. Too many snaps last year felt like survive the play instead of attack the defense. And in January football, survival mode gets you eliminated. And that ties back again to the offensive line. Philadelphia's identity for almost a decade was trench dominance. Defenses feared the Eagles because they got worn down. This year, defenses weren't worn